very clear from the evidence that the art of the painted caves of Upper Paleolithic Europe about 35,000 years ago, down to about 10,000 years ago, and the art of, for example, the San Bushmen of southern Africa, which also goes back 27,000 years, is an art of altered state of consciousness. These artists were putting themselves into an altered state, either using plant hallucinogens or using other techniques like prolonged rhythmic dancing. They were then painting the visions that they saw in this altered state of consciousness. Now, I've always believed as a writer that if I'm going to explore a subject, I must explore it personally. I must put myself into that story. And for that reason, I felt if I was going to write about the role of altered states of consciousness in human culture and human history, I had to experience those states for myself. And it so happens that there's a very ancient shamanic culture in the Amazon. It goes back at least 10,000 years, which makes use of this extraordinary beverage, ayahuasca, which is in fact a mixture of two plants. One of them is a vine, and the other is a leaf that contains the potent hallucinogen DMT. And when mixed together, they produce extraordinary effects. The ayahuasca experience is extremely potent, and it's physically very, very demanding. So it's not something that you want to do every day. So I spread my 11 experiences of ayahuasca out over a period of 5 weeks. It makes you very ill when you drink it. You have severe vomiting, you have diarrhea as well, and you just have to deal with this. Our ancestors, as their anatomical form slowly changed towards the modern form, behaved for millions and millions of years in an incredibly dull and uninteresting manner, with no creativity, no symbolism, no evidence whatsoever of a spiritual life. These were simply tool-using apes. And even as they looked exactly like us, which happened about 200,000 years ago, when full anatomical modernity was reached, when the human brain was the same size and the same structure as the brains that we have today, our behavior still did not change, and it remained dull and uninteresting, with no creativity and no innovation. And it's not until 40,000 years ago it seems like a light has been turned on all around the world, and suddenly the whole suite of behavior that we recognize as human is introduced all at once. And what is key to this change, what seems to symbolize it and sum it up and express it, is the dawn of art, the birth of art, and the first great art of the world. There had never been art before, and suddenly in Upper Paleolithic Europe around 35,000 years ago, you get the most extraordinary art being painted, and this rapidly is found all over the world. So it is really as though a light has been switched on in the human mind. The brain was there, but it wasn't being used. Something happened that led to it being used, and I believe, it's a long story, we can't go into it in detail here, that the evidence is compelling that what happened was that our ancestors discovered altered states of consciousness. They may have come across hallucinogenic plants by chance. They may have thought they were food items, and then when they consumed them, it brought about a radical transformation in the way that they looked at the world, and it changed everything about being human. So this, I felt, was the crucial, the vital before and after moment in the human story. It's connected to altered states of consciousness, it's connected to the use of plant hallucinogens.
The journey has been very, very clear and very, very specific in 3 major stages. One, understanding in the early 90s and right up to the mid-90s and late 90s how a few people control this, what I call 5-sense reality, by controlling the banking system and the governments, the political parties, both sides in different countries, so that whoever's in power, they're in power. Engineered wars and how they want to create this global Orwellian state which is unfolding so fast now. Then from kind of the mid-90s, something else started coming in, which was that these families that are on top of these pyramids of control in the banking system and the pharmaceutical network and governments, etc., were actually within this reality just vehicles for another force which some people would call extraterrestrial. I call it interdimensional. And it operates just outside of human sight, just outside of what we call the visible light. And it controls this reality in a kind of way that sometimes you see scientists and they're dealing with something they can't actually touch. So they have a tank, and what's inside they can't touch is in the tank, and then they put like these big arms on, and they can go in the tank and you work with this material, but they don't actually get touched themselves. And in a way, these interdimensional entities do that by, if you like, almost wearing the human body of these particular bloodlines, which I call the Illuminati bloodlines, which are hybrids between their vibrational state and the human vibrational state, which means the possession vibrationally is much easier because there's that vibrational compatibility. And this is why you find the same bloodline families in all the different countries are actually the positions of control. Because once you put the vehicle in the position of control by using your secret society network to manipulate them there, then what you've actually done is put the vehicle for these interdimensional entities in that position, and they therefore control events. But because we're only decoding the 5 sense level of everything, or the human level of everything, we see different human beings in power, and presidents and heads of banking systems, etc., and the Rothschild family and people like that, and the Rockefellers. But if you could just go beyond that visible light frequency range that is the only one we can decode, you would see entities that are anything but human, that were actually controlling those bloodline families. Then came the third stage, which started in 2003, when I had an ayahuasca experience in Brazil, and a voice talked to me for 5 hours about the nature of reality. Real clear, very funny, and mind-blowing and life-changing. Infinite love is the only truth, everything else is illusion. That's the first line that the voice said to me. All you really need to know is that. Infinite love is the only truth, everything else is illusion. And from 2003, and gathering pace all the time in terms of my focus and what's happening in my life, has been to understand what this reality is.
Well, I don't know how many people know about scalar waves, but I would imagine it's a few compared to the population. And even for myself, you know, I've gone through years of accumulating bits and pieces of information. And I think before I give a definition, well, let me give a definition first. Glenn Rain, who's a scientist out here in California, gave a definition that goes something like this: a scalar wave is a non-electromagnetic field that carries information and or other forms of consciousness, and it's independent of time and space. And so that's really a good starting definition for what a scalar wave might be. And it's really, in a way, it's an expression out of consciousness. Maxwell was a man who lived in the 1800s, and around the mid-1800s he speculated on the idea that there may be such a thing as what we're now calling a scalar wave. So that's its origins, and in the very early 1900s, like 1902, a man, I think by the name of Haber, wrote 2 articles and papers and published them as a scientist on what we now call scalar waves. But more exciting, in 1899, on July 3rd and July 4th, Nikolai Tesla, who most people have heard of if they're
Tesla, yes, of course.
He demonstrated the existence of scalar waves.
The aura that surrounds the body, you know, I see at least 7 to 9 layers, but that was not nearly as interesting to me as the chakras that spun, because you could see where people were getting into trouble, or you could see where what they were saying, and it wasn't that I thought that people were lying, but what they were saying wasn't in sync with what was happening, and people didn't know better. And I really, if anything, it made you very compassionate.
Once we learn how to work with these emotions, aka energies, now they're called emotions and energies are the same thing, we'll be able to be empowered to transform whatever comes our way. And that's the point, is transformation, not denial, not trying to be too nice or too good or too giving, but just working with what you've got, seeing where you get hooked, and learning to transform it. That's very powerful. Doing it on a day-by-day basis, then you could be free. Otherwise, you are bogged down by all kinds of negative thoughts and feelings that you don't know what to do with, and they take over in your body. And negativity on an intuitive level has a very strong charge. It really demands your attention. Whereas positive energy and calm and peace, all of that, is not as showy and flashy on an intuitive level. It doesn't grab your attention. You have to go after it. It doesn't really come after you, whereas negativity comes after you. And you have to make a decision to center and transform to get to a better place. And so it's a kind of a heroic act that you could do every day, working with this negative energy. Because I believe that on an individual level, when we do this, it affects our lives and our loved ones, and also resonates out to the greater world.